Thank you so much, Kathy, and it's wonderful to see you. And hello, North Central Pets. It's so great to be with you this evening. I come to you from Toronto, Canada, and I'm not sure if it's windy. To be honest with you, I've kind of been in my Zoom square for most of the day, and it's been a really great day. So thank you for inviting me to be with you today in this incredible and important session on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's just a wonderful opportunity to be with our presidents-elect and our leaders in our districts and to have this conversation and update you on the work of the DEI Task Force. I am the chair of the Rotary International Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. And so I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit of the work that we're doing, as well as some personal stories that I've encountered as I've had these amazing conversations around the Rotary world on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let me begin by just saying, you know what, it's incredible to realize that the world that we live in today has a population of 7.8 billion people. That's almost 8 billion individual and unique souls. And with that many of us, it's pretty amazing that each one of us is different in our own way. And embracing our individual differences and uniqueness allows us to always show up as our true authentic selves and to be valued for our thoughts and our contributions. And it brings equity into conversation and practice, which leads to a stronger, more cohesive society. Rotary has made growing and diversifying our membership a top priority. And it's to ensure that we reflect the communities that we serve and that we're inclusive of all cultures, experiences, and identities. And if we're honest, we know and we must recognize and acknowledge that individuals from many underrepresented groups have historically experienced barriers to membership, to participation, and to leadership, not only in our organization, but underlying in society and its institutions as well. But today, we have the opportunity to change that. This effort is crucial to our commitment to make Rotary thrive in this century and the next. And if we reflect on our four-way test, we are creating an organization that is more open and inclusive, is fair to all, builds goodwill, and benefits our communities. You know, we've just come through 2 years that have proven to be very challenging. And through it, it has become so apparent that our Rotary family has never been so important to us. More than ever, we need to hold on tight to these opportunities to be together, to share, to laugh, and to sometimes comfort each other in loss. These last 2 years have taught us a lot of things. The need to be kind, the value of listening, and how to reflect on what's important in our lives and in the lives of others. And we have stepped up, and I could not be more proud to be a Rotarian than I am today. We need to nurture these friendships we have celebrated, and friendships that have brought us through a very tough and challenging period in history. And this is the gift of Rotary. And you know, and we each know that it is unique and it is so special. How many times, not just in the last 2 years, but how many times have you acknowledged a fellow member or been acknowledged yourself by the question, how can I help? What do you need? Or congratulated a new Rotarian with a genuine welcome of inclusion, taking a keen interest in who they are and how they show up, taking into account visible and invisible diversities. Now, you may be able to see me before you in my little Zoom square, but if you can't, I'm going to give you a visual description. I am a white woman with white hair and blue eyes. What you can't see is that I'm the mother of 2 beautiful daughters. And 12 days ago, I became a grandmother for the first time. I'm so in love. Don't get me started on that little baby girl. I have Ukrainian heritage. I grew up a middle child, and I lost my mother to suicide when I was 25 years old, and she was 45 years of age. These invisible qualities define who I am. They define how I show up, how I make decisions. It defined the path I took in life, whether it was my education, my career, or the choice of my partner. we have this wonderful opportunity to get to know each other a little better with true intentional conversations committed to nurturing these precious Rotary friendships and allowing each of us to be true as ourselves. Now, many of our clubs have embarked on this journey to strengthen our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to truly welcome the community, the individuals that historically have experienced barriers to join or simply haven't been asked. Now, even though the board of directors have taken steps to strengthen and support our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we recognize that putting it into action is not a top-down effort. The change that is necessary will happen at the club and district level. Our members are the faces and voices that individuals see and hear when they look to join us in service and membership. You, as local leaders, each have a role to play. Our clubs and our members are vitally important as the main advocates for change. They're how culture within the clubs and districts change so that inclusion of those underrepresented groups become the norm rather than the exception. Now, having said that, we know that leadership is important, and that's why the RI board established the Rotary International DEI Task Force, consisting of a group of Rotarians and non-Rotarians with professional DEI experience. And this task force has been appointed to advise our board and is committed to providing tools, support, and guidance. We have strengthened our DEI statement as a commitment. A code of conduct has been developed to encourage respectful language in our interactions and to remind us to be supportive of each other in this journey. That code of conduct outlines how we can create a welcoming environment and celebrate diversity in our clubs and in our communities. Because each of our Rotary clubs belong to a unique community, and two clubs in the same city can look very different. They can have different dynamics or different culture. But in your city or your town, you as presidents are the first point of contact with a new member, a potential member, or even some of our current members. So be deliberate in your efforts to create an environment of inclusion and equity. But how do we know what that environment of inclusion and equity will look like? One of the first steps that the task force took was that in order to determine where we want to be, we had to focus and determine and decide where we are today. And so one of the first things we did was launched a survey. And so for the first time ever, we sought to assess the current state of DEI of our organization. And we partnered with PwC, a multinational consulting firm, to ask our members about their experiences, their perceptions, and their thoughts about diversity in Rotary. And more than 31,000 of Rotary's members from 121 countries responded to tell us what they want to see Rotary do to create a more diverse membership, to build an inclusive culture, and to provide more equitable opportunities for all. And Rotarians have told us that they want Rotary's culture to become more inclusive. That feedback was consistent and clear around the globe, no matter from which country. Rotarians, Rotaractors, and Rotary leadership overwhelmingly expressed a commitment to improving Rotary's culture. And they told us that they believe in harnessing the power of DEI to further our impact. And that's one of the main reasons why we're doing this, to make us even stronger and more relevant today and in the future. Last month, we celebrated our 117th anniversary. That is absolutely incredible for a membership organization. And I like to always reflect on some of the quotes that our founder, Paul Harris, said back in the early 1900s and show their relevancy today. And you know, Paul Harris once said that if Rotary is to realize its proper destiny, it must be evolutionary at all times and revolutionary on occasions. The future of Rotary is dependent on us here today as leaders to harness the power of a diverse, inclusive membership and be the choice organization of our children and my new grandchild that they'll want to be part of and take us into the next century. But we know a changing culture, inclusive culture, especially as we're moving through this journey, is difficult to measure in the short term. But we know that the long-term benefits will be exponential. When we think about our membership, we know that we're really great at successfully asking people to join our organization. But as you know, membership is our #1 internal priority. However, asking people to join often isn't enough, because without including that value, we will continue to lose members through the back door as fast as we can introduce new members in the front door to our organization. And that value is the world of inclusion. The respect for those different to us who have significant contributions to make to our club if we allow them to do so. You know, in North America, 41% of our members leave before their second year is complete. And that's a remarkable statistic. Our global membership surveys that are conducted by Rotary International cite the #1 reason our members leave is the club experience, or also known as the club culture. Now, let me share a story with you. I was speaking to a large club in my zone recently, and we had a really great meeting. It was a lunchtime meeting. We were on Zoom, and we touched on DEI, but that really wasn't the focus of the meeting. But we wanted to continue the conversation. So following the formal part of the meeting, many of us stayed behind. And after a few minutes, a Rotarian who's Black spoke up. And he shared with us a very personal and impactful message. After 15 years of being a Rotarian in this club, with his fellow members, his Rotary family, he's never felt 100% accepted. And he never felt he could express his concerns or feelings. And he saw many other potential members join that didn't look like the majority of the people in the room, only to leave in the first couple of years. This conversation that we're having today in our clubs, in our districts, gave him the courage to speak up. And he was initially hesitant because it was personal, it was emotional, and it was very brave. Now, looking around the rest of the Zoom squares, I noticed that the other members' faces were very surprised. They hadn't intentionally excluded this man and his culture. They simply never asked. And they perhaps didn't feel comfortable asking those questions that are sensitive and very personal. But this is exactly how the culture of belonging begins. It's how we overcome unconscious bias. It's true, intentional, respectful conversation. And as I said a moment ago, a wonderful opportunity to get to know each other better. Creating that space where our intention is to get to know each other better, intentional intent to really listen to everybody's story and who they are. Becoming comfortable, being a little uncomfortable, asking and answering those questions that perhaps have prevented us from getting to know each other's culture, our religion, our family situation, helping through challenges, and certainly celebrating life's accomplishments. One of the key themes that emerged from our survey when we asked Rotarians about their Rotary experience was that 1/3 said they wouldn't recommend Rotary to somebody with a disability. Let me tell you about Pearl. Pearl is a Rotarian from the Caribbean, and she's a member of the Senate, the highest legislative power of her country. Pearl is in fact the former head of the Senate of her country. Pearl was born blind. She always knew of Rotary because she was the recipient of Rotary's support as a child. The weeks away at Rotary Summer Camp, as well as many other altruistic programs led by Rotary designed to improve the lives of disabled children. As an adult, Pearl was never asked to join Rotary. This successful politician was well known and well regarded for her incredible leadership, but the local clubs saw the barriers to her membership rather than the opportunities. Pearl has shown up every day of her life. She brings a skill set most of us don't have. She has an alternate, innovative way of thinking and accomplishing tasks because she has to. Pearl is a Rotarian today because a member and a good friend invited her. They had a conversation with her to ask, what do you need to participate? That's it. It's that simple. Just have a conversation and ask the person. Embrace Pearl and her differences and open the door, because there are many other Pearls. Invite them to join Rotary, because we will be stronger for it. Could a person with a disability walk into our clubs today and see themselves represented? This is a huge opportunity, and one that our survey respondents emphasized. They also told us that 48% of them actually told us that members with a disability, they didn't feel could hold a leadership position in Rotary. Well, we've just learned that Pearl is a distinguished member of Parliament. She visits and she serves her constituents. She delivers speeches. She travels the world. And thank goodness a member asked her to join Rotary, because we are stronger for it. Now, many members tell us they don't yet understand or fully yet know what Rotary's overall vision for DEI is. And you may get that question as well in your clubs. And because this is a relatively new organizational focus for Rotary, it's important that we do a good job communicating our vision for DEI and helping our members understand what an inclusive experience can look like across our clubs and in our communities. And you've seen a consistent message in Rotary Magazine, in blog posts, webinars, and communications around DEI from Rotary and our communications department. This consistent messaging will help and support members to understand the vision. But I ask for your help here. My call to action: please make DEI part of your conversation. And I know that many of you are champions, because I've listened to you. I've seen your postings. I've heard of your work through my colleagues. And it may look different for each of you, but you have to remember that this is a journey. And some may take longer on this journey, and some may choose not to embark on this journey. We also recognize that this won't happen overnight. And as a global organization, progress will look different from region to region, from country to country. And some parts of the world may focus on matters regarding generational gaps, while others may focus on opportunities for gender equity. But most importantly, since this is a collective effort, every individual in our organization has a role to play, and you will be at the forefront of our effort. Your leadership will lay the foundation for building and strengthening our environment of inclusion and equity. And I want you to know that the actions that you take will create a change that will reverberate for generations to come. So what can each of us do? Be a champion. Speak out respectfully and hold yourself and others accountable. Invite local diversity, equity, and inclusion experts to speak to your club. Encourage and support participants from underrepresented groups to take on leadership positions in your clubs and in your districts. And go to Rotary.org. There is an incredible amount of resources there for you, as well as our Learning Center, where you can take a course to expand your knowledge on DEI. Let me tell you another personal story. When my father, who was born in Canada, left the family farm in the 1960s, he moved to the city of Toronto to find work and start his career. But his Ukrainian last name was very hard to pronounce, and it had a lot of Y's in it. And he found it hard to find work. So he made the decision to change his last name. So when I was born, my last name was not the family's real name, all because of discrimination. I grew up knowing that because of society's systemic barriers, my last name was a lie. Exclusion, whether intentional or otherwise, hurts everyone. We are stronger when each individual is respected for who they are and is able to show up as their true authentic selves, and therefore feel valued and can contribute in equity. This is an amazing time to be in Rotary, an organization that has shown leadership in the journey to inclusion and equity. And I know that you are incredible leaders. You have an amazing year ahead of you, where you can imagine Rotary, you can imagine what DEI and inclusion will do, not only to the new members of your club, but the current members of your club. Get to know them, make DEI a priority, and welcome your community to join you in service. because we will be stronger for it. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to continue the conversation with some questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Valarie. And please, anyone, feel free to put any questions in the chat, or I'll have you raise your hands momentarily. I did see that Haley Bayline had a comment, and I did ask her, and she said she was willing to share her comment. Haley, would you like to unmute yourself and share?
Of course, I would be happy to. So I said I have an invisible disability. I have what's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I am considered physically disabled, although I don't look it. And I have come, especially throughout Rotary and throughout my life, basically, that I have a very different outlook on life and things like that, and sharing our experiences and I guess basically valuing our differences, whether it's a difference in ability, a difference in your outlook on life, all of those things should be valued and supported, because you never know what those differences may lead to throughout a conversation.
Thank you, Haley. What a great point. I mean, if we all acted, looked, and sounded the same, where would the learning be, right? We would never learn from each other. And I think that that's an incredible opportunity. You know, Kathy mentioned I was going to speak about my business, and maybe I'll take this opportunity to do that now. So my husband and I were Tim Horton franchisees in the city of Toronto for 25 plus years. And my husband is deaf. And my husband, as a teenager, could always get a job, but he couldn't always keep the job. One of his favorite stories, and he has an incredible sense of humor, is you know, being one of the people who would collect the carts at a young age for one of his first jobs at a grocery store, until the announcement came on, you know, to please go and collect the carts in the parking lot. And of course, he wouldn't hear the announcement. He lip reads, and he's a master at it, so he could, you know, get through an interview. But he lost many jobs because he wasn't, you know, accommodations weren't made for him. So we had an opportunity to hire someone with Down syndrome in the very first week of our owning of our restaurant. We were very busy, and we needed somebody in the dining room. And this young gentleman named Clint, knocked on our door and asked for a job. And we had never had any experience working with people with developmental or intellectual disabilities. But we knew that if Clint walked down the road and continued to knock on doors, maybe he wouldn't get an opportunity. So we decided to hire Clint, and Clint became our success story for being an inclusive employer. We recognized very quickly that Clint was one of our best employees because he had such a hard time finding a job, that his dedication to the job that he did, the tasks that he performed, outperformed everybody else in our team. And we quickly realized that if we built capacity of people with disabilities, which really represented our community, that we would improve our retention rate, our productivity rate, and certainly, to your point, Haley, our innovation rate, because everybody has a very different skill set that they bring to maybe the same role that each of us would normally do, whether it's clearing a table, loading a dishwasher, or serving a customer. We each bring our unique perspective to that. And so we had people with disabilities, 18% of our staff at any time, which actually represents the population with disabilities in our communities, before we take into account family and friends also who have disabilities that support. We represented our community. And so when our customers walked through the door and they saw our team, it resonated with them. You know, they have their family members, their sons, their daughters. And so, you know, they knew that it was a welcoming and inclusive environment. And we had customers tell us they came out of their way to do business with us because we reflected the community and they saw their family represented in our team. And I quite often compare that to our Rotary clubs, because each of our Rotary clubs in the community is very different. But each of our communities involve or have people with different abilities, whether it's disabilities, whether it's mental health, whether it's demographics that just currently aren't represented in our clubs. And when you walk through the door and you feel that you are represented, you feel you can show up and be your true authentic self and valued and contribute right away. So it's not about ticking a box that say, oh, we have women, we have people of different sexual orientation, or we have different minorities represented. it's about truly understanding, first of all, who we are, and portraying that and understanding the respect that we would have, whether it's in your workplace or it's in your club, and then reaching out to the community and welcoming those who aren't there. And so, you know, my business case of our Tim Horton restaurants, I compare quite often to our clubs, because each one in our communities was very different.
Thank you, Valarie. Kay, I see that you have a comment or something. It's not showing up in my chat. Would you mind unmuting yourself and sharing? You're mute. There you go.
There we go. It was an image. It was a file, and I was trying to share it because it was relevant. And let me see if I can share my screen.
I can allow you. Oh, there you go. You're able to.
That's all. I was just sharing.
Oh, I didn't see it. What was it?
It says, if we were good at everything, we'd have no need for each other.
That's
Thank
true.
Thank you, Kay, for sharing that. Does anyone else have a question for Valarie? Otherwise, I might kick this off by asking, you know, what can each of us do at the local club level to be more inclusive?
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of things that we can do. And I always say that it starts by getting to know each other and having those conversations. But, you know, there's just a wealth of resources on Rotary.org. And I always try to promote the Learning Center as a book club, if you will. So how do we start those conversations in our club? Because sometimes it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it feels personal, right? So I quite often say, why don't you pick one of the modules in the Learning Center, whether it's uncovering our unconscious bias, assign it to your club in advance and say, at our next Rotary meeting, we're going to each discuss your perspectives of, you know, what you thought of that module and how it relates to, you know, your work life or your personal life, and allow people to share without really drawing them into the conversation, because some people may be a little uncomfortable. But it's a wonderful way to start the conversation and just introduce these subjects without, you know, preaching, without forcing the conversation. Just let it happen organically through the learnings that came out of the modules. So I think that's a great way to start the conversation. And the more we educate ourselves in our clubs, the more I think we should, you know, be encouraged to reach out to community partners to celebrate some of our local events with our partners, whether it's, you know, Ramadan's coming up, or it's International Day of the Disabled, Women's Day, Pride Day, whatever it might be, and really, you know, show them that we are open and committed to being partners in our community. And the more we work alongside them and have these conversations, the more that I think, you know, I quite often say this isn't a membership initiative, but I think organically it will welcome more people to our clubs, and certainly show in our community that we as Rotary are leaders in this area, and that we're committed to this conversation.
And we do have another question, but I think just to kind of play off of what Valarie just said, you know, partnering with some of those organizations in your community that may have individuals with disabilities who may be able to volunteer for some of your projects as well. That alone will help bring inclusivity and show that you're welcoming. So many times we forget to ask. We have a lot of simple tasks with a lot of our projects that some people are able to do, and we might want to make sure we ask and include those people as well to be involved.
If I can just piggyback on what you just said, Kathy, you know, one of the lessons that we learned in our business is that when we interviewed people, we always made it very clear, whether they identified with a disability or not, that we were inclusive employers and that they would be working with people with disabilities. And when somebody identified that they had a disability, we always made, this is our unconscious bias, and it's perfectly okay and it's perfectly normal. We always unconsciously made a judgment call. If we were hiring for a specific job and we thought that they would fit that job and only that job, then we were going to hire them. And almost always we were wrong when we made those judgment calls to the abilities and to what they actually could do. And for quite often, it was one of their first opportunities to work, and expectations, maybe not from their parents or their teachers, especially when we're talking about young students, because we also did school-based placement programs for summer. And quite often it was the first time expectations outside of home or school were being asked of them. And almost always they blew us away. And I think they surprised, I know they surprised their parents and their teachers. It happened every time. So sometimes don't always assume, and again, I'm not saying this to criticize what Kathy just said. Don't always assume it's the simple tasks.
Sure.
Ask the person. We practice something in our business called ATP. Very simple. Ask the person. Ask them what they need to be able to show up, to participate in an equitable way. And quite often, the accommodations that they might need, they bring with them. I mean, as with Pearl has to get up every single day and go to the legislature. She has to travel. She has her support network and her accommodations already in place. So just asking the person what they need in order to participate fully is really all you have to do.
Thank you, Valarie. And you can point that out any day. I appreciate that. It just shows that we often say things too that we don't obviously think about right away. So,
and Kathy, I'm sorry, I'm just getting on my.
You're fine.
You know what? We have to be uncomfortable with these conversations, right? And that's why I say if we have respectful and intentional desire to have these conversations and we're allowed to make mistakes, if we ask a member of our club a question and they know that we're coming at it from a true intentional, I want to get to know you perspective, not that, I'm criticizing you, or that's really kind of strange, or I didn't know that about you. And, you have to set that stage where I'm not going to say something that might be insulting. I truly want to get to know you better.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Nate. It is, some of our old guard gets threatened when we talk about inclusion. Can you give some tips on how to best deal with that mild resistance?
Sure. A lot of the resistance is based on the fear of missing out, the fear of lost opportunities, perhaps for ourselves, when we include others who maybe haven't been in the traditional membership or traditional leadership roles. I think it's all about meeting people where they are and having that conversation. It's all about education. It's about meeting where they are, but hopefully not leaving them there, bringing them along with these conversations. Change is hard for a lot of people. And some people may, as I said, may not embark on this journey. And so one of the things that we did when we established the code of conduct from the DEI task force was to really provide clubs and leadership with the tool and the framework, and almost from a leadership position, the permission to have these conversations and to support our members in these conversations. But if you ever get to a point where you're having a conversation and it becomes very personal, it can become almost in the form of adult harassment, you need to walk away. You need to realize that, that you can have these conversations, but they may not want to come along. And so I don't ever want any of you to put yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable. Rotary International is there to support you. And if you go to rotary.org and look up the code of conduct, there's a specific website or a specific email box that you can direct inquiries to. We also have our adult harassment policy that you can fall back on. But, I encourage you each to stand up to behavior that in the past we've turned a blind eye to, and it's not acceptable today. And anecdotally, I am seeing a huge culture change as we get back out there in president-elect training sessions. I think of a situation that happened 2 years ago on stage from a very poor joke that was told. In fact, right after I gave a DEI speech, which was even more shocking. And the reaction in the room 2 years ago, and I've had this conversation with those same people and say, now fast forward 2 years, put yourself back in that situation and what would it be like? And the answer is so different. And that's what encourages each of us in this space to continue this conversation. So it really is just about having those honest conversations with people, listening to them, trying to kind of, understand where they're coming from, because change is hard, but again, try not to leave them where they are.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions that anyone might have? I know it's a tough conversation sometimes, but what are the things that you're thinking about with how you may be able to take this to your club or to start a conversation in your club?
I'd also love to hear if any of you are working in this space, have started a DEI committee or use the Learning Center in your club.
This is Joe Hayes from Rotary Club of Edina Noon. We started as a race and equity, and we've just going to be changing it to DEI. And we have set up some meetings. We've had 2 in the past couple of years, and we also had a book club set up where we actually bought the books. We budgeted some money and bought the books for some people. And we've got a couple meetings set up, and it's been very productive, slow steps. We've had some blowback on one of the scholarships we favored. It wasn't about the scholarship, it was more the name of the scholarship than anything, but nothing too fierce. But we're doing some baby steps, and there's a lot of resources in the community with businesses that are running diversity programs that you can tap into for actually doing a meeting surrounding it or some type of workshop. So we've got a couple of good champions on ours. We're very fortunate that way. So, and talk about having it help our overall membership. I think that's pretty cool.
That's excellent, Joe. I get the question sometimes, when is Rotary going to give us, the framework of how to do this and what we should be doing? And my answer always is, DEI looks different in India than it looks in Europe, than it looks in Canada, but it can look different across town as well. So this really is a culture change that is bottom up. And the DEI task force was put in place to provide the resources and the tools in order to support you in the work you're doing. And what's really, really exciting is that the task force started almost 2 years ago, and we've made significant strides. And of course, President-elect Jennifer is making DEI one of her overarching themes, and she's empowered each of the district governors-elect to make this part of the conversation with a toolkit that's been designed as well as to how you can be supported. So we're here to support you. We're here to listen to you. The change is going to happen at the club and district level because it's going to look different everywhere. I mean, we can say we want gender parity in Rotary, and we should have gender parity in Rotary. And I think that's one of the obvious statements that we can make. But we're never going to ask you to report that you have gender parity or, the strides you're working on to have equal women and men represented in your clubs. Because that in Rotary Act, that's already a given. Rotary Act is already 55% women in Rotary. And so again, it really depends on your community. And so we're here to support you, but we're also here to listen and hear what's happening, because what's happening in our clubs and districts is also going to drive further ways that we can support and develop resources for you.
So Nate also has another comment here that leads to another question. He said he was in a hybrid meeting seminar last hour. It seems to him that Zoom could allow for more diverse programs in our community, which is pretty homogenous. So if you are in a rural community or a smaller community where you don't have a lot of diversity per se, how can we use Zoom and technology today, Valarie, to start these conversations and to have programs?
Well, look at me, I'm in Toronto and you guys aren't, and I'm with you live. So what's to stop us from reaching out to some lived experience, some amazing stories that are out there from around the world? Every time we hear somebody's personal story, we all learn and we all grow, and we look through a different lens. And I think that's a huge benefit to these conversations. So even if you live in a homogeneous community, where most of us can find some diversity in our towns and in our clubs, But reach out beyond. We have so much to learn when we hear. I've been speaking all over the world on diversity, equity, inclusion. Tomorrow morning, I'm in Singapore at 8 a.m. And I learn from them every time I speak. I mean, I really enjoy the conversation after I deliver my remarks because my ears are always open and I'm learning from them. So, and they're hearing a different perspective from me.
Mhm. Any other questions for Valarie? Haley has her hand up. Go ahead, Haley.
So I guess thinking on the flip side of things a little bit, we have talked a lot about what we can do to kind of help feel those people or have those people feel included and increase diversity. What would your advice be to those who are traditionally minorities venturing into Rotary for the first time?
Well, I think so inviting those who aren't represented in our Rotary clubs right now and how they would feel when they walk in. Well, I mean, I think many of us can think about walking into our first Rotary club meeting. I can speak from personal example. I was pretty darn intimidated, and I'm a white woman. So if we put on the lens of somebody who is not represented in the room, we hear stories all the time of when the first women were invited into Rotary, or people who feel like they're being invited to tick a box, or they feel maybe some tokenism going on in a room, and that's not healthy. That's not great, right? I mean, if you think of my story about that man who was in that club for 15 years and still didn't feel welcome, my first inclination, and it's not a judgment because I think it's true of all of us, is there something wrong with the culture of our club when someone who's there for 15 years finally speaks up and says, I don't really feel like I could be my true authentic self, couldn't share my unique perspectives. So, that's why I try to emphasize that I think we have to get to know each other before we open the doors and welcome others in. And then, of course, it's not about ticking a box. It's not about going out and deciding which demographics aren't present and inviting one token person from each of those demographics to make us feel better, because that's all it's going to do is make us feel better. It's not going to be that inclusive environment that is truly welcoming. And that's why I think joining with community partners, really showing them that we're intentional, but also getting to know them and then welcoming them as a whole or as a group to join us in service or in a celebration, vice versa, us with them with us, whether you're having an anniversary party, you want to invite the community in. And I really think it's about building capacity and being honest that we need to look through a different lens and learn all the time.
So Randy has a comment here. It also seems important that there's coordination between presidents, president-elects, and president nominees. So there's more of a sustainable commitment on DEI. DEI work seems better when it's not perceived as a temporary item. It's a changing the culture on a broader scale. Would you like to comment on that, Valarie, and putting together a team and having continuity?
Sure. One of the recommendations that the task force brought to the board was an optional district DEI committee. And the idea being that you would name this person for 3 years and that it would have buy-in of the district governor line, and that we would report that chair position to Rotary International. And so we could collectively share resources, best practices, stories, etc. The same thing can happen at your club level, but that you need to assign that position. I'm not sure that it belongs with the president-elect or the president nominee unless they have experience in the area. I believe it should be part of your board. It should be somebody who has that skill set to bring, to remind us in everything that we do at the club or district level that we look through the lens of DEI. And that might be our physical events to make sure that they're accessible, because any of one of us could need that accessibility tomorrow. Disability is the one demographic each of us can join tomorrow through an accident or aging or anything like that. So that's just not about our new members. It's about our current members and their circumstances as well. So looking at our events, looking at how we conduct our meetings. I'll tell you a story. I told you my husband is deaf. So the part of the Rotary Club meeting that we all enjoy the most is the banter that goes back and forth and the conversation, whether it's sergeant at arms or it's just, what happens when we're eating our meal or, even in service. Well, my husband doesn't hear any of that. He does have some hearing, but he really relies on reading lips. So the president decided that she was going to accommodate Mark and didn't ask Mark, didn't have a conversation with Mark, and decided we're going to have the speaker use a microphone. Let me use my water bottle. So here's the speaker now speaking into a microphone, and Mark can't read the lips. She didn't ask Mark what accommodation Mark needed. So this is something that with true intention at your district, at your club, if you assign somebody this role, then they will look at everything that your club does, how they welcome members, but how they do everything today through the lens of DEI. So I think that it's a wonderful way to start. If you ask your members, that I'm sure in their large corporations that they're working in, that they've probably had DEI training, that it's part of their culture at their workplace. So I also believe that is necessary at the district level. I think that the district needs to have a DEI committee, and that committee member needs to sit on the general board of the district so that every conversation, every publication, everything we do is accessible and is thought about, not just for disability, but looked at through the lens of inclusive language, whether it's, he, her, look at our policies, anything that is preventing us from being more inclusive. I'll give you another example of something that a club and a district can do. We have a lot of policy. Now, policy won't change culture, but sometimes policy can really help. We have policy in many of our clubs and districts around our interview panel when we're promoting leadership or interviewing leadership. And I'll use the district as an example. In my district, the panel that interviews for the district governor position is made up of the past 4 or 5 district governors. Most of the time, we're going to end up with older men on this panel because that's where our district governor line has traditionally been. So when you think of that interview panel and you think about unconscious bias, and it's not intentional, as long as you're breathing, you have unconscious bias, you unintentionally will promote, will listen, will interview people who look and think like you because you used to have that role and you know what that role is all about. So the first step would be to make sure that that interview panel has diversity, right? So that everybody will have a different perception, different questions, different need for what that leadership role should look like. And if we start there in our leadership positions, then we will see more diversity at district, at zone, on the RI board, right? Because those nominations and those interviews are really begin at our club and district level. So there's many different lenses that we could use to look through starting at the club level.
Thank you, Valarie. Any other questions since we have her still here? Looking around.
I got a quick.
Dan, go ahead.
I got a quick question. There was a membership thing set out a couple weeks ago, and it listed all the types of people that we should be asking to join our Rotary Club. And I looked at that list, and I noticed I wasn't on that list because I'm a blue collar worker. I worked in the healthcare field for the last 18 years of my life as a frontline support worker in long-term care and in supportive housing. And so I didn't fit into any of those professional categories that were listed on that membership list. So I think that would be part of our whole inclusion thing. As Valarie has mentioned, we have to invite all the different people in the world to join us, not just the professional people. Think of the mechanics and the carpenters and the auto workers and all those types of people.
Oh, that's a great point, Dan. I'm not sure which document, and maybe it's an internal document that you're speaking to, but a great example of how we need to put the lens of DEI on documents that we're sending out that might not even be inclusive, but be exclusive to certain people that we should have in Rotary. I always say my Rotary includes everyone.
And Dan, we can definitely share that and find out, if that was a district thing for you, and we can make sure that we'll do it anonymously, but we can share that information with your district governor as well.
I did actually get that. I did send that to our
Oh,
district governor,
good.
Keith Rocky, so he was aware of it. And he was
Good.
going to follow up on that. So,
Okay, thank you. And so that's the first step right there is, like Valarie said, having the conversation. Sometimes that can feel uncomfortable, but it's the steps we need to take. Any other questions? Debbie, go ahead.
I have a question about classifications and inclusiveness and exclusiveness. Similar to what was just brought up. How do we look at classifications today in Rotary?
I think that there's regional differences around the world and even sometimes in our community. In some parts of the world, it's still very much the C-suite, the CEOs, the presidents of companies, and it's an honor to be asked. Not that it isn't an honor for us to be asked to be in Rotary, but it's it's an honor when you're at that level. At other places, they're not using the vocational system very much. To Dan's point, we should be including everyone. I remember asking a friend to join Rotary who worked in her community, but decided to stay home to look after her children. When I asked her to join Rotary, she says, but I can't join Rotary. And then we opened it up to include many more different classifications around, I can't remember all the titles, but certainly outside of the scope of CEO or business owner. So I really think it depends on your community and where you are. At the end of the day, our vocational background meant that we each brought a unique skill set to everything we do. And I think that's true of all of us in a non-exclusive way. I think we each have something to contribute from our perspectives, and it makes us stronger. So I think we started off with vocation. We can still call it vocation. I think we just need to broaden our definition of vocation. But I'm not sure how many still have their vocation on their name badge of their name badge of their club, and that's a good thing. It starts conversation. It reminds people of what background we might have, but I'm not sure. I mean, it really depends. Some people have probably walked away from having that vocation on their name badge, and that's okay too.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I would like to thank Valarie. Let's give her a little round of applause here.